We're part of the Farehams breeding program. Charles Fareham is a hop merchant who've taken on this breeding program of a friend of ours, and it's sort of expanded quite rapidly, and we've sort of become part of that in the fact that the breeder then does the cross and creates a plant, and if the plant looks anywhere near promising in the first year or so, then we're taking on a sort of plots, I suppose. So say a plot of 30 plants, and growing those on farm to see if they actually work for the farmer. So we've got gosh, I don't know how many varieties we've got. We've probably got 20 plots that are about to be harvested this year. We've just planted another 20 which will be harvested next year, and so we've got a sort of ongoing rolling plot thing going on, and if any of those come out and look remotely promising, then we plant a whole row. So we're developing these new varieties, and what's exciting is we seem to be developing varieties that are very disease resistant, including the wilt, which is quite a major issue for UK hop farmers, and as well as powdery mildew and downy mildew, which are also problems. With this farm, then my grandparents moved here in the early 30s. They moved from another hop farm here. Both sides of the family of my grandparents had been growing hops way before that. So I'm now the third generation of Andrews's at Townend Farm. I took over from my father in 2004. Before that, I managed several different farms, all hop farms, starting in 1990. Managed, I suppose the biggest one was managing a hop farm for a brewery near Leominster, and then from there moved here when my parents retired. And we've been here now, that makes it so 14th harvest.
What were the kind of the heady days, and what were the kind of difficult times, and the days coming back?
Going back in my short bit of hop growing history, most of the time it's been quite difficult. The prices have been relatively low. It's only the last 3 or 4 years that the price of hops has actually increased to a significant level where hop farmers can reinvest. Most of my time growing hops up until the last 3 or 4 years, it's been trying to find a way to cut costs all the time, because the prices have been fairly low, and although there has been peaks, the troughs seem to have been a lot bigger than the peaks, and for longer. And so it's and I think coupled with that, because of the wilt situation in the UK, a lot of the varieties that we grow or have had to grow because of wilt haven't been worth as much as we'd like. That's been quite difficult to manage, really, over the years.
So what's kind of kept you going with it? Why have you not thought, blow this, I'll rip the lot out and plant something else? Or
it's been quite close to doing that. There were a few years when we first moved here, took over from my parents, and there was a couple of years when we broke even 2 years in a row, and on the whole farm. And the hops, I think we had some average hop crops, but the price was quite low at the same time, and it really was a bit of a struggle to survive, to be honest. You don't buy certainly don't buy any new stuff. You don't buy any second-hand stuff either, and you just Yeah, you don't go on holiday. Don't do anything that you can't afford because you can't afford it. It was a bit hard going. Yeah, I think it's because I suppose I stuck with it because I like growing hops. It's quite a challenge. Some parts of farming can be a bit like growing cereals. It's not very exciting, and the finances aren't very good in growing cereals either, unless you've got sort of 500 acres plus. We've got quite a small farm really. We've only got 150 acres. To make a living out of that on sort of what we call mainstream farming, it would be quite difficult. We just haven't got this sort of scale of size to do that. But I do like growing hops, I'm afraid. So to my, well, that's a good or a bad point, I don't know, but that's where we are.
So yeah. What is it about the hop then that draws you to it?
I think it's just because it's different. It's challenging. It is every year is different to the previous year, even though you think it's not going to be. And it is a challenge.
Tell us a little bit then about the kind of the cycle and the complexity and all the, some of the things you have to think about from March through to harvest.
Yeah, so I suppose the hop growing season starts somewhere around March, where we string the hops. So we put the string up, which goes from the ground up to the top of the wire, and it's simple little things like nobody knows, or actually putting the string up is quite hard work. You've got to get the angle of the string right. And as stupid as it sounds, if it's too upright, they won't. They get to the top too quick. If it's too sloping, they don't actually get there. So that the string needs to be the right angle. Then you've got to train the shoots as they come out of the ground. You've got to train them to grow up the string, and you need a certain quantity of shoots per plant. So a plant might produce 20 shoots. You only need 4, maybe 6. If you have too many shoots, then you just get a bush of leaves and you don't get many hops. But you've got to pick the right shoots. You don't want the really big strong ones, you want the sort of fairly weak looking ones. So to just the ordinary person, they might think there's no difference, but there is quite a difference between what happens to the very big strong shoots and the little thin ones. So you start off with that, and you've got to make sure that once you've selected your shoots and they're going up the string, the other ones that are on the floor don't come up the string as well. So you have to go through maybe 3 times to make sure you've got the right number of shoots and they're all going up the string. And then they get halfway up the string, the wind blows, and somebody has to come along with a stick and just put the heads back, because the heads come away from the string. And in the meantime, you're looking for pests and diseases, and so we start spraying them about the middle of April, and we spray them every fortnight on a sort of regulated program. And we have to chop and change the chemicals we put on depending on what diseases we've got and what bugs we've found. And you can very easily, if you don't get your spray program correct, you can very easily have total crop loss. And I've seen that in the past. Within my lifetime, it's happened to me, it's happened to other farmers. Come the end of August, they get disease come in, they haven't sprayed the right spray on, absolutely no hops in the field whatsoever. I know it's a little bit difficult to imagine, but total crop loss. The plants look great, leaves, stalks, they're all there, no hops whatsoever. And that, obviously that's quite, financially that's quite difficult to deal with, as well as mentally. So we're dealing with all this pest and disease problems we've got to deal with, the wind blowing the heads off the strings. We need the plants to get to the top of the string by the end of June is the usual thing, or some people say the 21st of June, the longest day, they need to be at the top wire, because they grow according to day length. So once the days start going shorter, they change their physiology and they start to fruit, or go into fruiting mode. So sometime towards the end of June, going into July, they then start branching out, producing laterals, which then have burr on them, which is the flower. And so to get them to do this, you've got to make sure you've fed them the right amount of fertiliser at particular times. But that varies every year depending on how much rain you've had, how fast they're growing, and whether they look a bit yellow and not. And each variety, coupled with all these little things, each variety is different. So some of them need a bit more, some of them need less. They need more in May and less in June, and so the whole thing just is quite complex. I'm bearing in mind that you know, we're only growing 60 acres. It's not like we're growing vast acres of this crop, and it's like having 60 acres of garden rather than 60 acres of field. You really have to fiddle with it, and at the same time as that, we're trying to control the weeds, because the weeds obviously take nutrients from the hops, slow them down. They take moisture off the hops when it's dry. We also put some farmyard manure on, which helps them grow. The list just goes on and on, you know.
Yeah. So tell us a bit about when you get to harvest time then. How do you know when to get your labour force in place, and when is it right to pick the hops? And what
so hop picking, the start date of hop picking is always a contentious issue, and to actually organise the people to come on the day when you're going to start is virtually impossible. You have to give them a rough idea, and generally they sort of accept that, okay, it's probably not going to start exactly when you said, but they know it's going to start somewhere around there. What I tend to do is I get my staff to come a little bit early. That gives me a little bit of flexibility, because the problem with it, if it's hot and dry, the hops will ripen up extremely quickly, and there's a certain point when they start to go brown, and it's like going over a cliff edge, and suddenly 2 days later and they're completely brown and they're almost worthless. And some varieties are a lot worse than others, and it is, you can lose a crop because you haven't picked it early enough. That happens quite often, to be honest, that you end up picking brown hops. And it happens, maybe not the hops at the very beginning, but it happens quite often as you're working your way through the season. If you're struggling to pick because you've had breakdowns, you've got a lot of hops and they're difficult to pick, you just can't pick fast enough, and you can watch them going brown in the field in front of you, which is a bit disheartening, but there's nothing you can do about it because you're doing your best. But so to getting the people organised for a particular date is quite, well, you just have to pick a date and sort of go for it and hope you've got it somewhere near, because generally people want to know a couple of months in advance when hop picking is going to start, because quite a lot of them are taking holiday from their own work and they need to book that holiday so they can come hop picking for you. We try and sort of pick them just before they go brown, because that's the point when they've got the most brewing value, and that's probably the point when you're going to get the highest yield. But there are times when we end up picking some hops a little bit too early, because we've got the staff here, and what you know in the back of your mind is that at the end of September, going into October, generally your hops are definitely going to be going brown by that stage, whatever you do, and so you know you've got to pick some, probably got to pick some that are a bit underripe.
So presumably there's different varieties, you have different varieties that ripen at different times, so that you kind of, by the time you're 2 weeks on, the next ones are ready.
Yeah, so we've got, I can't remember now exactly, but I think it's 10 or a dozen different varieties that we pick in a sequence through the season, and they more or less sort of roll onto each other. And I would say generally, sometimes we do pick some a bit. We always, every year, I could say we pick some that are a bit underripe, and then we always pick a few that are overripe, because they don't always ripen the same time as they did the year before, and so they overlap in a different fashion, and you just have to sort of juggle it around a bit and swap it around. And then of course here we've got a whole load of plots to fit in, and partial plots and bits and bobs for this breeding program, and that's quite difficult.
So if we can travel back in time, can you tell us what your kind of earliest memories are of being on this farm and hop picking times? What do you remember about it?
Hop picking times. Well, when I was younger, then we used to employ I don't think now what they'd be. Looking back, it felt like a family of gypsies, but I wouldn't like to say for sure that they were, because I can't quite remember. But so they used to come in caravans and be in one of the fields, and we used to pick. We only had, I think we had about 20 acres of hops here, and about 15. We used to pick my uncle's hops as well, Uncle Graham. So they all got picked on the farm.
Sorry, can I start that again? That was really loud.
So hop picking, my earliest memories of hop picking, we used to have a family of gypsies that used to come. I think they were gypsies, but I wouldn't be 100% now, I've sort of forgotten. But they used to come and they'd be in caravans, and they used to work hard and have a bit of fun, but they'd pinch all the fruit out of your garden and that sort of stuff, usual things. But I can remember as a kid, spend all day just riding up and down on a tray load of hops. I'd get on the trailer in the field all the way up to the shed, get back on the empty one and back down to the field again, and just do that all morning. It was great fun. And there'd be a big pile of hop waste out the back of the shed, and I'd be jumping up and down that sort of thing. Spent time in the kilns shoveling hops into the pocketing hops and that sort of, yeah. And the smell of hops was all through the house, because the pockets were stored in what is now my office, which is straight into the house.
Would have been all dried in?
Yeah, all the hops were dried in there. That was our only kiln. So they used to do, when I was younger, they used to do dry here and down at my uncle's farm. So whosever hops were being picked at the time, either ours or my uncle's, half of them would be dried here and half would be dried at my uncle's. And then when we were picking his, we'd dry some of his and he'd dry some of ours, and so that worked quite well. But there was a point, I think, when we were expanding and he wanted to expand as well, so he then got his own hop picking machine. And so then we were just drying our own hops here, and we used to dry then 24 hours a day. So the kiln would do 2 loads, and they'd put a load on sort of about lunchtime. They'd get the first load on, and then the second load would have to go on in the middle of the night, and they got the first load back out.
So people working 24 hours a day, did you remember?
In the kilns, yeah.
Sleeping downstairs.
Yeah, there was a bed down in the bottom of the kilns.
Can you do a bit of detail on that, really, about people sleeping in there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so because we were then drying 24 hours a day, so the chap had a bed down in the bottom of the kilns, and he used to sleep down there, and he'd be here, stay here all week, and go home on a Saturday night, and come back Monday morning ready for another week in his in the bed in the kilns, which although it seemed idyllic at the time, looking back, I'm sure it wasn't quite as idyllic as we all thought, if you know what I mean. But
that's been incredibly hot.
I think it was hot, but that's what you did. You know, that's how it is. It's hot, it's sticky because hops are all sticky, and there's a lot of resin. But you're used to it. And that's what you do.
So would he have stayed awake all night, or would he just be there in case of?
No, I don't think he would have stayed awake all night. That's a bit too much really to expect. But I think the oil burner would have it had an alarm on it. So if something went wrong, the alarm would go off and wake him up. But I guess, I mean, I don't know now. I can't remember, but I guess he would have, you know, set his alarm so he'd get up and have a look at them every few hours. So he'd be sleeping in the day as well as at night because he'd have to be doing other things as well. So it's yeah, in the kilns it's quite a nocturnal activities at times.
Do you still get up now to check yours? Or
not so much now. No, we turn the oil, but I suppose we've got bigger kilns, so that we can turn the burner off about 10, up as 10. And then the other kiln is a gas one, and we leave that running through the night on a lower flame, lower temperature, and so we can run that through the night, and it's not quite so because it's a bit more modern. It's got some automatic cutouts and that sort of thing, so it's not going to go up in smoke. Basically, that's the worrying thing. These old dryers, they're not particularly, you could say they're not particularly safe. You can't just leave them to go. And that sounds a little bit, come on, why don't you get a safe one? But that's how it is, I suppose. Everybody, yeah. I mean, drying hops is a little bit fraught with danger, and hop kiln fires are quite common. Not really common, but they're quite common. I've had experience of one. I managed a farm for a brewery, and we had 250 acres of hops, and we had a big set of kilns, and in 2002, I think it was, we had a massive fire, destroyed the kilns, 600 bales of hops, which was about a week's hop picking gone, and we used to pick about 100 bales a day, so it was quite a big setup. It was a bit scary at the time. It was a massive fire. Had a ruck of fire engines there and all that sort of thing. And so the fire. So we had this big fire, destroyed the kilns. It was actually, the fire started on a Sunday evening, so we used to pick 6 days a week, but not on a Sunday. So there was nobody about. Started in the bale store, and by about 10 o'clock there was people banging on the door. You know, you've got a fire in your shed, go out there and there's this massive hole in the roof with flames coming out through it. You know, by that stage you just, that's it. It's, you know, saved a few bits of machinery that were around the outside, and the fire brigade managed to stop it spreading into the picking shed, and it was a damping down exercise, because it was raging that much. There's nothing you could do, and it did just, yeah, it was a quite scary thing. It was awful, really. Yeah.
So in your memory, but like sort of tales of when things like that might have happened in the old days, when you know, there just wasn't the capacity to put the fires out, or there was sort of other accidents, or it means it must have been a bit of a health and safety nightmare.
Yeah,
to be frank,
I think it is. It is a health and safety nightmare.
In the past, it must have been even worse. Are there any kind of
yes, I
ones that have gone down in folklore or anything?
Not. I mean, I know people. I don't really know that many fires. Only the very more recent ones. I mean, and obviously all these old buildings, they've got loads of wood in them. You've got a big hot fire underneath. It must have been awfully risky because people before diesel burners came along, they were burning coal or coke, and then the other thing they used to do was in the bottom of the kiln before they started it up, they used to put a pan of sticks of sulphur, pour some meths on it to light it and to get this sulphur to burn. Now the idea of the sulphur was to you burn the sulphur and you get this sulphur gas go up through the hops, and all the bits of brown would be taken out and they'd be turned yellow. You're thinking, gosh, this sounds awful, but that's what all farmers used to do. And one of the awful stories I've heard, because meths is quite flammable. So this pan of sulphur with some meths in the kiln, and it was lit, but wasn't burning enough. So somebody, a local farmer, goes back in, throws some more meths on, and you can imagine they just killed him. The flame comes back up the and that killed him, and I think that was the end of hop growing on that farm. They just you lose the plot a little bit when you. But kiln fires, I mean, there's been quite a few recent ones, but I don't. I don't know of any that sort of going back a long way, and so we get loads of people come here and they know something, and know people who've picked hops and their families always picked hops and all this sort of stuff, and it's got a massive heritage because I think mainly because of the hand picking.
So we're this is kind of being funded by Heritage Lottery Fund, and we're kind of going around collecting these stories and getting the photographs seen and all of those kind of things. Do you see a value in that? Do you think it's important that these kind of things are? And why do you think they?
I mean, it's important that some of these memories are recorded because not so much me, because I've got a few years. Well, hopefully I've got a few years left, but a lot of the older generation, they don't always tell you what's gone on. I mean, some of them do, but it needs to be recorded because this information gets lost in time, especially sort of. I find it very interesting for family farms like us, and there's things that have gone on and we don't know anything about it, and suddenly my uncle comes up and says, "Oh, well, we used to do that down in that shed," and you think, "Well, I never knew that. You've only just told me now, and I've known you for 50 years, and you've never told me anything about that." That sort of thing. That is quite, it's quite nostalgic, really. That people have been doing, drying hops here for probably 300 years. Might be, it's difficult to tell, but something like that. That takes us back to what's that, about 1700. So it might even be further back than that. And unlike his bits of information about, we used to grind the corn in there and chop the straw in this place and all those sort of things.
You never heard any of that before?
I sort of knew roughly because I'd seen the machines in the shed myself, but not really. No, not to that detail.
Gives people permission, doesn't it, to reminisce?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because this information will get lost otherwise.